The PlayStation Vita has been a topic of conversation as of late for a variety of reasons. Let's just say that this handheld has experienced quite the roller coaster of emotions as of late, and honestly, even I have brought it up because it seems to be very relevant right now in its own right as of July 2021. And so, in today's video, I would like to go ahead and talk about where the PlayStation Vita stands as of 2021. Let's not let this console die. Let's go ahead and dive right in. Before we continue, don't forget that I have a Twitch channel that you can go ahead and follow me on for live microphone reviews and much more than that. But you're also going to find my Instagram and a link to the Tech Summit Discord in the description. So come join the community because it is a pretty cool one. We've also opened up a Patreon as of late where if you join, you'll be automatically entered to win one tech gadget every month in our exclusive giveaways. Details to that are going to be down below. Don't forget to check out the description for everything. Now let's get right into the video. So let's talk about the Vita's overall design because I think that this is going to lend to some of my points of conversation later on. So the Vita has a design that still looks great today, in my opinion at least. It's got a great form factor for most people that makes it pretty comfortable to use in my opinion. You've got your usual set of buttons that you would find on your DualShock 4 controller or DualSense controller, minus the L2 and R2 buttons, which instead actually reside within the rear touchpad, which I suppose is a matter of preference, but I don't particularly love that aspect about it. I do have a carbon fiber dbrand skin on it, but it does still work just fine. The Vita has some of the best buttons on any handheld, since the D-pad and the face buttons have a very clicky feel to them, and I really like that about it. You do also have some things on this device that you just won't really find on modern handheld, for the exception of the 2DS and the 3DS line, and those are the rear and front-facing cameras that have aged very poorly, incredibly so. For ports, you've actually got the proprietary charging port, but this was actually replaced with the micro USB port for the slim model. You've also got the slot for the cartridge port, and you've got an accessory port that seldom really got used, a memory card slot as well, which is going to be all the way at the very bottom, and yes, it is proprietary, so that means that you cannot use any micro SD cards with it, at least not by default. You'll also find the headphone jack, by the way. The PlayStation Vita does have Bluetooth functionality and can be used with Bluetooth headphones if you want. The PlayStation Vita still looks really good, and in terms of its looks alone, it has aged incredibly well. At least I think so. Now, I have the original PlayStation Vita, and this one is the only one that has an OLED display. This display still looks very good in terms of its color reproduction, and it is a great size honestly, at around 5 inches. It's also a touchscreen, which I always liked. However, at this point, the resolution here is what holds it back, but it really depends on what you're looking at, because sometimes it can still look pretty good. But I do still think this is a great display, and it also helps that it still gets pretty bright as well. In terms of hardware, there's quite a bit that has aged pretty well as well, for the exception of the proprietary storage memory card port, but people have found ways around it. More on that pretty soon. So when it comes to the Vita software, yeah, this is still extremely outdated. It still has the Skittles menu icons that do not look good. Like they didn't look good in 2012, and 9 years later, they honestly still don't look very good at all. The interface is outdated, but gets the job done, I suppose. I can say at least that multitasking is actually handled pretty well here. And yeah, because it's such a simple UI, it is still pretty efficient, and I haven't really had any complaints about performance for the Vita really. Though software is still one of the weakest points of this console since the last update, which was update 3.73, yes, was released almost 2 years ago, and all it really did was deliver on performance improvements, quote unquote, so don't expect any further updates for the system, but you probably didn't really need me to say that at this point. However, I'm sure that you must have heard recently that Sony was looking into closing down the online game store for the PlayStation Vita along with some other older consoles, but thankfully that was actually revoked because the Vita is a system that many people love for the plethora of indie titles available on it, and especially for JRPG fans like myself. But I would venture to think that A lot of people won't really be able to take much advantage of this for two very big reasons. One, the internal storage for the Vita is less than 1 gigabyte. In fact, it's around 500 megabytes, and you really can't fit anything onto that. And two, the fix for that is to purchase extremely overpriced proprietary storage for it that can very well cost you as much as the PlayStation Vita itself. And yeah, it's really just not worth it. Which is why people have actually gone ahead and resorted to other methods of getting micro SD cards to work with the Vita, since micro SD cards are much more affordable, more reasonably priced, and I would never recommend to anyone that they buy these proprietary cards anyway because of that price tag, and you do have other options. Plus, the console is pretty much dead, as it is, if I'm honest. Not to mention that the Vita isn't really receiving any kind of support from Sony, with the exception of the game store staying open for it, but that will also only last so long. Now, this is a handheld that I would only recommend to people who are into the indie scene of gaming, love JRPGs, and or want to use this as an emulation device, as many people have done so already. This is a great machine for emulation if you're into that, and from what I have seen online, so many older games look better on this beautiful OLED display, which is tough to argue with, to be completely honest. There are some Final Fantasy games here, such as Final Fantasy X and X-2. You're going to find Persona 4 Golden, which is the poster child of the PlayStation Vita, the Danganronpa series, and much, much more than that. I'm sure a lot of people might want to check it out. So most of these, as of now, have already become available on places like PC and the Nintendo Switch, but it is still really cool to have them all in one device like this, one that is even more portable than either one. And another fantastic thing about the Vita to this day is actually the incredible battery life. The Vita features amazing standby battery life that has lasted me over an entire week without exaggeration, and even screen on time with games like Persona 4 Golden is very good. I absolutely love that aspect about it to this day. In a lot of ways, the Vita was always ahead of its time since it had features that made the Vita such a powerful choice for a lot of people. Though Sony's weird pricing of their memory cards, the poor marketing, and the lack of support that Sony themselves have given to the Vita were some of the biggest factors to the Vita not doing as well as it should have, and by extension you could even say that it failed as a result. The Vita has remote play features with the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation 4, which is incredibly cool, though it won't really work with the PlayStation 5, which is kind of unfortunate, and it does kind of kill off that aspect. You know, like the Vita has reached its peak, I suppose. It used an OLED panel, at the very least for the very first model, which is the only handheld to feature a display like it in 9 years, and I'm not really including any emulation handhelds that may have come out with it in between this timeline or this time frame. This handheld also had Bluetooth support, which means that I can use Bluetooth headphones with it just fine. Something that the Nintendo's own Switch lacked back in 2017, so 5 years after the Vita was released, and it's still going to be lacking that feature when the OLED model for the Nintendo Switch ends up releasing later in 2021, which just makes me think, what the hell is going through Nintendo's mind there? Like, that's ridiculous to me. There's a web browser here too. Obviously, there's Wi-Fi support and even cellular models available for it back then. The Vita was set up back then to be one that could last a while, and it was Sony themselves that killed the console at the end of the day. I have always liked my Vita, and this is actually coming from someone that got this sometime in mid-2018, when Sony had already basically killed off the Vita from their lineup, so that was about 3 years ago. I thought it was an awesome device that was certainly more pocketable than my Switch or the Switch Lite, and while the display is lower res, it does look better in some aspects, but by that time the Vita also had a lot more games that were more interesting to me than the Nintendo Switch did at launch, and that got me to really keep using the Vita almost religiously for quite a while. There are a lot of gems on the Vita, and while I know that I keep talking about the portability aspect here, I really do think that that is a very big factor as to why I like the Vita so much to this day. It's for the same reason that I like the Nintendo Switch right now. If the Switch was only a home console, then I would have never bought one, like, at all. because I don't really have a lot of interest in Nintendo first-party titles. Most of my interests really lie on like JRPGs and things like that, which are usually available on Sony's own platforms. That's, in my opinion, where the best JRPGs are at. So if we had just gotten another home console, I would have never bought the Switch. But because it is a portable console that can play all of these great games, AAA games, or I guess at the time had the potential, since we barely had any games back then, I rushed in to buy one. And to this day, I do not regret it, because luckily we have been getting so many great games on the Switch, but there are still many more that we should be getting. Though with the Vita, this was always only meant to be used as a handheld, and I think Sony did a great job in building this to be just that. I mean, this has features that are still extremely relevant today, but that the Switch is lacking due to Nintendo's own negligence on their end, such as Bluetooth functionality, which I won't shut up about. You know, with things like headsets and headphones, an actual satisfying to press D-pad, the option for symmetrical thumbsticks. Well, I should say you only have the option for symmetrical thumbsticks, but I would have liked to see a version of Joy-Cons that did have symmetrical thumbsticks instead. And also great multitasking. Even though the Switch has a lot more RAM than the Vita and an even simpler interface than it as well, but you still can't access the Switch's online store without closing your game first if you're in the middle of a game, which is completely absurd to me. I think that the Switch is still lacking in a lot of ways that the Vita excelled at back then, and now it's more apparent than ever how advanced of a little gadget this was, and to an extent, still is. So in conclusion, I do think that the PlayStation Vita is definitely worth buying in 2021, but you should look into alternative ways of getting the most out of this little monster, such as maybe using Homebrew to install emulators, or just expanding the storage through microSD cards instead of the proprietary storage of yore. Because the Vita is a very versatile little handheld that is capable of quite a lot, and one that in some ways makes it just a better portable machine, in my opinion, than the Nintendo Switch, since I don't really have to carry wired headphones with me if I don't want to, and there are a lot of games that you might want to check out today as well, a lot of indie titles. I myself will look into making more out of my PlayStation Vita, and I'll most likely make an updated video for you all to, you know, like to be able to talk about it in greater detail and just see what the Vita can really become to this day. I'll try to really max it out if I can. But right now, this is totally worth it in my opinion, even 2021, and this is where the Vita currently stands in 2021. Still not being a relic of the past, but actually still having plenty of potential that hasn't quite been tapped into just yet. And thank you so much for watching tonight's video. Now, I would like to give a very special thanks to all of our patrons. Those are going to be the tier 3 patrons, which are going to be Sara, Wazal, Joe Moss, and Omar. Thank you so much for all of your support, because it really does go a long way. And it really does allow for us to be able to make more content just like this, and to be able to dedicate more time to making content just like this. We very much appreciate it, and also there are plenty of perks that come with being a patron, so do make sure to check that out. Links are going to be down below. But now I would like to give also very special thanks to the tier 2 patrons coming right up. And this is super important. I would just like to give a very special thanks to all of our patrons, which are going to be listed right here on the screen. Again, a massive thanks to you all for supporting us to help us create the kind of content that we bring to you on a day-to-day basis. And thank you so much for supporting the Tech Summit podcast as well. And just remember that if you would like to be a part of this community too, and then do make sure to check out the links to our Patreon, where you don't only get bonus episodes of our podcast, but you also get automatically entered into one of our monthly giveaways of a tech product that we have reviewed that is of at least $50 in value or higher. So links to that down below. Also, don't forget to follow me on the rest of my social media, like my Instagram and my Twitch. I almost made a mistake and said Twitter. I don't have a Twitter anymore, but it's because of the heat. The heat is confusing me. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. This has been Francisco from Tech Summit. Thank you for watching again, and I will be seeing you all later. Enjoy.